Hi everybody, welcome to the Beauty of Pastel. Today I have a very special painting lesson for you. Years ago I painted a special painting. This one right here is by far my most watched video lesson here on my YouTube channel. And I haven't ever released the full video here on YouTube with instruction. So I've edited it for you today and I hope you enjoy watching this come together. It certainly is fun to kind of go back in time and watch it myself. I hope you enjoy. Hi everybody, I am excited to share a painting kind of from my beginnings of sharing lessons on YouTube. And I thought for a long time that the footage of just the raw painting was lost because the footage on YouTube has, instead of a voiceover, it's instructions that appear on the screen, which sometimes can block the creation of the painting. I painted this way back in 2015, 16, and it was an early experiment in using, of course, alcohol washes, but also acrylic ink. And there are some things about this piece that I don't really necessarily do anymore, especially the layering order. I am working right now towards an alcohol wash using my dark blue new Pastel, and really doing the same thing that I still do, blocking in the major outlines of the shapes. I'm sketching in the little house that you can see over there on the left. Of course, I am vastly changing the color that you see in that photo reference. This is much more of a explorative color, interpreted color, and something that I wanted to really play with, creating kind of an analogous scene using greens, blues, and yellows, which of course are all on the color wheel next to one another. The one area where I am going to be applying some different color is in the initial underpainting of the sunlit areas of the grass. I'm going to be putting in some fuchsia, some really bright magenta that I then will layer the yellow grasses over. But I was so excited to find this raw video on a very old hard drive and re-edit it for you so I could talk through some of the challenges of the piece and also some of the things that I have adjusted since I painted this years ago. One thing you'll probably notice is that there isn't really any sound to my pastel strokes in this particular video. That's because this was well before I really kind of knew the ins and outs of video, and there's lots of background noise. Music, my kids are talking, I'm talking to my kids. I think we're talking about how I need to go take them all to different after school activities, but hey kids, just wait a few seconds. I'm gonna finish this painting really quick. So I had to take that sound out. Right now I am washing in some green into the sky, thinking ahead that I like this color because it kind of adds a moodiness, especially as an underpainting. I haven't painted with green underpaintings in a while in the sky, and it's something that this painting video especially encourages me to return to as something to play with. This is also, you'll notice, before I started really using my fan brush. I'm using a flat synthetic brush here. It's much tighter, and of course, it's not nearly as loose. It's a smaller brush. I am still using alcohol, pushing that blue new Pastel into the paper. It takes a little bit longer, this process, because the brush is so much smaller, but you can also see that I can get some really thin small strokes with that flat. Since this is a little bit more tedious, I'm going to go ahead and speed up the application of alcohol real quick. Now this is a particular area that has changed a little bit from what I do now, is that I'm putting the acrylic ink after the alcohol, layering in. I really wanted there to be some dark, deep shadows around this house, and I'm almost carving the house out of the distant trees. And I'm applying the acrylic ink with some foam here. This is the black pipe foam, and I don't really use the black pipe foam anymore, although it does have, if you cut it, you can have kind of some nice neat square edges, especially around houses. You can really carve them out. I'm mixing colors here. I'm using some greens and some, of course, some very dark blues, and really just being kind of loose and playing. This, once again, this is years ago whenever I was first discovering my love of acrylic ink. I am using UArt here. This is still the 500 grit. That's something that I don't know when I decided 500 grit versus 400 grit, but the 500 is just a little bit less gritty for me, and I love it. I also like the 400 grit. Sometimes it's hard. You can't really find the 500 grit if you buy UArt in pre-cut pads or sheets. That's mostly the 400 grit that you can find. And so really either one is kind of interchangeable, but I do prefer the 500 grit in my roll that I can cut off the paper myself. Once again, I'm going to speed it up just a little bit, still using that pipe foam, pushing and pulling that acrylic ink around the page. Here is where that square edge of that pipe foam helped me carve out that little house. And now I'm going to start applying my dry pastel layers, starting off with distant trees and really wanting to carve into all of the dark mass to add layering to the tree effect that I have. Right now, everything looks pretty much flat, but I want there to be a sensation of distant trees and trees in the foreground. And of course, when things are cooler, lighter in chroma, or I guess less intense in chroma, will help you with that effect. I am playing with just kind of a neutral-ish blue. This is kind of a grade blue in a pretty medium value right now. And then I'll be applying warmer colors in the front, on the fronts of those distant bluer trees. And that's whenever you have something that's warmer towards you, it looks like it is coming towards you. Warmer light tends to come forward, cooler colors tend to go off in the distance. Now, that's not always 100% true. I don't always only put cool colors in the distance. Especially where I live in my region, we have a lot of sagey colors, cactusy colors that are very, very cool in the landscape. And so weaving those in, sometimes in the foreground, is a beautiful way to add interest to your grasses and your texture. But for trees, oftentimes it's just a general not rule to follow, but just a general idea to keep in mind that if you really want to add layering and distance to forested looking areas, then adding cooler colors off in the distance will help you with that. This was from East Texas, this photo reference. I was on just a car ride with a girlfriend. We were having so much fun. We were driving around trying to find places for me to photograph, to paint. And Tyler, this area is called Tyler, Texas, and it's very, very woody. There's lots and lots of trees, and it's sometimes hard to see through them because it's so thick. It's much different from my area of Texas, where I live on the plains. So I really wanted to get that effect, create that feeling of distance and just the thick foresty look. I'm adjusting some shadows here, and in a second I'm going to pull that little flat brush right back out, barely damp with rubbing alcohol, and I'm going to it's going to help me get some nicer lines around my house. I do want to make sure my house is nicely nestled into this tree bouquet, but I'm going to work on it a little bit. I was also very new to structures in the landscape, kind of figuring it out as I went. Since my brush is wet and I am, of course, painting over pastel, I picked up a little bit of that color, and it helped me with the eave shadow of the roof line, just working on straightening some things here. I do want this to be very impressionistic, but I also want to be pretty careful that all my angles make sense. Once again, there's no paint on the brush. I'm just kind of picking up the color that's already on the paper. Now I want to start applying my nice golden pastel over the pinks, and also looking at some of the warmth on the trees, using almost a ladder effect of a dark warm green, a mid-tone warm green, and a light warm green. All of that helps add that layering quality and interest to your trees. I'm also following the value map that I created, using the same colors that I have up in the trees down on the shadow areas of the foreground, knowing that the pink areas are going to be very lit with golden colors. I'm wanting my shadow areas to have the hint of blue, of course, from that underpainting, but also have the sense that these are nice warm green grasses. It's a nice warm day. Just because you have a shadow area doesn't mean everything in it needs to be lackluster or have no color. And of course, also lightening the bridge. So where the pink meets the blue, I'm going to apply a slightly lighter green because if there was a light splashing across a field, whatever is in shadow closest to the light is brighter than what's deep in shadow. So this is the bridge color right here. I'm bridging the color from the blues over to the pinks. I'll be applying the yellow here in a little bit. Doing a lot of scribbling here and also flicking my pastel up. Not really trying to make every single blade of grass, but I do like the texture, especially over the dark areas. You can really see it over on the right-hand side next to the house, how that effect creates that really nice wispy effect. These are quite soft pastels. This is a Terry Ludwig. Most of the pastels that I was using at this time were probably Terry Ludwig's. Those were the very first pastels I purchased. Other than I did buy a Selenier set, my very first set, which I have recommended that if you are new to pastels, I would recommend the more medium hard pastels to hard pastels instead of the very soft pastels, because they're a little harder to control. And until you learn your specific touch and how you handle and how hard you're pressing on your paper, sometimes soft pastels, very soft pastels like the Seleniers, can kind of get people in trouble. So I would recommend Terry Ludwig's, Unison's, Mount Vision's, Giraud, Rembrandt's, New Pastels, and I'm sure that there are others on the market. I have not even tried all the pastels that are on the market. I have found the ones that I really like, and every now and then I'll order one or two of a pastel brand that I haven't used before. But if you're curious about the different types of pastel, feel free to ask. This community is wonderful about sharing their knowledge, and of course I love to share it as well. Now, what I'm doing here, once again, a little unsure about my building, but I'm wanting to make sure that those values are really accurate in the shadow area of the side of this little house. And painting in, once again, I do this several times, trying to get that the corner of the house especially sharp, because that's where I want a splash of light to come across, and I really need the values to be accurate for it to read well. Oftentimes you can put alcohol down, it makes it a nice dark color, and then it dries so much lighter. So I'm trying to get, once again, I really want a nice hard edge. I need an eave. I'm figuring it out as I go, using mostly dark blue colors to help me create this little house. And if I get a little too wild in applying it, I can always just get my brush right back out, straighten up those lines. Being pretty delicate here. Also want to work, this house has a neat little second, almost like a little window area that I also want to carve out, where there's a second little awning. And I used to use a palette knife all the time. It helped me really scratch in and create some fun texture. I don't use it quite as much anymore. I used to get questions about that all the time. Why are you using a palette knife on pastels? And here is where I'm working a little bit on that corner where I want some splash of light to create a dappled light effect. Still using that brush, straightening out my lines. Now I've pulled out a nice light blue. Getting a good roof line, little awning. I also decided to go get my little charcoal pencil to help me with a nice deep shadow under that roof. I think that's the same charcoal pencil I still have to this day that I pull out. It's sharpened now on both ends, but I have had that charcoal pencil for years and years. I love to use charcoal pencils for windows and doorways in paintings. Applying the alcohol again, I'm working towards a certain look. It may seem a little redundant to do this over and over and over again, but when you are painting a little bit on pastel, especially if you have a fairly light layer of pastels, I've mostly been using fairly hard pastels on the house because I needed sharper lines on the house. This right here is a softer pastel, and I'm carving in and around all of that alcohol, and it helps create layering, just a gentle layering of color and that vibrant shadow light effect that I really wanted. Then that layer of blue really helped that side of the house just glow a little bit. I wanted to zoom in right here so you could see the subtlety of that brush and how I'm just barely touching and kind of painting over that lighter pastel to help me get some really interesting dappled light effect that's hard to get with our thick, chunky pastels, especially when the brush is very dry. It kind of splays out a little bit, which helps me get some lines that I like. And then, of course, the little door and window, those were so fun to put in. It just made the painting to me. Adding some little window over there. I always think houses and barns, they need windows and doors because it's inviting, and it's a layer for your viewer to see inwards and wonder a little bit about your painting. It also feels very personal when we have windows and doors, mysterious maybe, and adds a further just layer of interest to your pieces. And let's put in those final marks in the grasses. Generous scribbling here, being really bold, and also adding a little bit of warmth to my roof because there's so much warmth on the grass. My roof was a little cool, and so I'm kind of glazing some color over it just to warm it up slightly. I haven't worked on the sky yet, but that's coming towards the end, as is my normal. Really generous mark making in the grasses here, wanting it to be grassy but also loose. Using some nice golden, warm yellow. There are differences. There can be lemon, cool yellows, and warm golden yellows. I prefer warmer yellows, especially if I'm using them in a sky. Carving it into the distant trees just a little bit, all those blues that I put in the beginning. Also not pushing too hard. I don't want to cover too much of that kind of nice green, but once again, very analogous except for those fuchsias that are in the warm grasses, which adds kind of a nice little hint of flavor. I did decide after I scribbled in and scumbled in some lighter grasses and the sky, I decided to lighten up the lowest area of the sky just slightly to give it a little bit more character. I'm also going to add one step lighter of value on a few of the trees, especially that appear to be in front of the little house, especially layered over some of those very darks. It creates a really nice mood. Once again, holding my pastel in different ways. So scumbling, scribbling, marking it up and down. I love, I think that's a Rembrandt, and those are fantastic for little grasses. Adding a few little sky holes in and around. This is something I may, if I was to do this piece again, I may hold off on some of those lower areas of the sky holes. I don't necessarily think they are necessary. It's also something I tend to avoid a little bit because it breaks up my shape. I didn't go crazy like I have before in some of my older paintings, but I would suggest, if especially in this type of tree, you don't necessarily need all of the sky holes. But it is what it is, and this painting is hanging right by my desk as I talk, and it's behind glass, and I love looking at it. This is by far my most watched YouTube video, and I was so excited to find this raw video so I could re-edit it, improve the lighting a little bit, zoom in, add the photo reference, of course, and instead of the floating text, be able to really talk my way through the piece for you. So I hope you have enjoyed watching this. Thank you so much for being here. For those of you that have been with me for this long, since the very beginning, just bless you and thank you so much. I hope you all have a fantastic day. Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed watching that pastel come to life. It was so much fun to paint. It's always fun to teach you new techniques, and I hope you learned something. If you did, please give this video a like. I would love it if you would subscribe to my channel and hit that little notification bell so you can know when a new video comes available. If you'd also like to help support this content coming out, every little bit helps. I would love it if you would consider visiting my Patreon page. The link is right here. Thank you so much for considering it. Thank you for spending your time with me today, and I will see you around.